Welcome to Motorcycle News and part one of our 2026 Small Adventure Bike group test. I say part one because this year the class has grown hugely and there's no way we can do them all in one like we have done in previous years. So we're going to break it down into three kind of subclasses of sort of convenient rivals, and then once we've got a winner for all three of those, we're going to bring those together in a grand finale later this year. So we'll have the parallel twins, we'll put all those together, then the more road focused singles, and then finally, or first in this case, we'll have the Rally 300 singles. So CRF300 Rally, long-term protagonist of this class, bit of a favourite. We've also got Voge's 300 Rally, which is a quiet favourite too actually. They're so cheap, people just buy them on price alone in a lot of instances. So it'd be interesting to see how that fares in this competition. And then we've got the new boy for this year as well, Rieju's Adventura Rally 307. In this case we've got the R model, slightly higher spec, we'll come into that later. And when we get to that grand finale, I know some of you will be going, why aren't they on the same tyres? That's not fair. At this point, we're just dealing with them as they come, and something you'd have to deal with if you were getting into adventure riding for the first time. For that final test, we will put them on more appropriate tyres, but for now, we're just going to sort of break them down and kind of play it as it lies, really. So we'll see how that goes. So we're going to do a long loop, so some distance riding, bit dual carriageway, A roads, things like that. Then we're going to get into sort of B road fun as well, see how fun they are on sort of tarmac back lanes. And then of course we're going to go off road. So initially we're going to do the Peddars Way through Norfolk, sort of gentle green lanes, very scenic, down to Thetford Forest where things get a little bit more technical and we can perhaps split them up on performance in greater detail. So I'm going to get on with it because I'm gagging to ride these bikes and see which bike is the best in this class. So we've got to the end of day one, our big road day, to get to the part of Norfolk we wanted to. Spent a lot of time on dual carriageways and a little bit of motorway actually as well from our base in Peterborough, and then on some A roads as well. And to be honest, all three of these bikes aren't ideally suited to it. And we'll be honest, we kind of wanted to push these sort of above and beyond what you'd realistically do with this kind of corner of the small adventure bike market, just to see where the kind of stress points and comfort limits are. And the result was that, okay, there's a little bit of a hierarchy, but they're all kind of not ideal for that. So I'll start with the Voge, as I'm kind of leaning on it at the moment. Has a bit of an issue where the seat foam just kind of collapses within the first 10 miles or so. So you're effectively sitting on the seat base. And then before long, I would say within the sort of 25, 30 minutes, you've got a sore backside because you're sitting on a piece of plastic. And then the other issue you've got as well is the foot pegs, that, because you then sort of compress the seat, they feel a little bit high and a little bit forward, so your kind of legs are in a very slight sort of stress bend. And okay, I've got quite long legs, but the sort of shorter riders in our tests, sort of roughly sort of 5'8"-ish, they had the exact same thing. So it's kind of something slightly out of kilter with the rider triangle there. It's got a bit of screen on it, obviously, works okay, but we were sort of doing an indicated sort of 67, 68, 69 miles an hour, something like that, and actually on a little GPS device I was using, that was showing us around 63, 64, and based on the fact that we were only really sort of catching HGVs fairly slowly, I'd say that's probably about realistic. Interestingly, all three bikes appeared to overread by the same amount, so they were at least kind of in cahoots on that. But and then moving on to the Rieju, which was kind of slightly better than the Voge was. Similar issue as well, that the seat does still compress, but for whatever reason it wasn't quite as pronounced, and then the foot pegs were a little bit more sort of natural and put your legs under a little bit less duress. Handlebars, no particular issue with that, or the Voge actually for that matter, sort of decent, sort of nice wide open position as you get with these bikes. Screen possibly a little bit better on the Rieju, just in terms of noise more than anything else. They're all about the same sort of height, so the sort of weather protection or protection from the cold in the winter is kind of pretty evenly split, but the Rieju was that little bit quieter at that sort of speed, which is always nice. It just makes things a little bit less fatiguing. But ultimately, after half an hour, you're a bit sore, and you don't want to do more than an hour at any sort of sustained speed. Really, you're going to be picking a route with any of these bikes that's going to take you away from main roads, and ideally picking up a byway, and even if it's only for sort of a handful of minutes, just to stand up and rest a little bit, or just stop, sightsee, have a drink, bar of chocolate, that sort of thing. And the best of the three in relative terms was the Honda, but in all honesty, the same issues kind of come to the fore when you ride this over any sort of distance too. So seat is a little bit better to start with, but again, that compresses, and after a while it's not very supportive at all. You get a sore backside, maybe a little bit later than the other two, but it's still kind of hour tops. Screen is probably the best here, a little bit quieter again than the Rieju, a little bit wider as well, so you probably find in cold weather you'll appreciate that little bit of sort of reduced wind blast that bit more. But the main benefit it has, over and above anything else, is the kind of reduced vibration. When you select top on the Honda, it seems to sort of drop the RPM a fair bit more than the other two, about 1500 RPM, whereas the other two, it's a much less pronounced drop. And that just reduces the vibration that little bit more, and just means that your hands aren't going numb as they tend to sort of on these when you get into the end of that hour stint. So, okay, you're still going to stop at about the same sort of time on Honda, but if you have a whole day where you need to get across the country, or maybe even getting on a ferry and getting into Europe, it's going to be just that little bit less kind of aggro, and you're going to be feeling it a bit less than you are with the other two. So, although it's a slim victory, it is a bit of a victory for the Honda. Incidentally, actually, we filled up earlier as well, about 160 miles, because the Voge was asking for fuel first. Fuel consumption for the three, going in reverse order, was 49 for the Rieju, which was pretty disappointing actually, although consistent with the standard model that I tested earlier in the year in different conditions, to be fair, but it was still kind of a little bit of a letdown for a small capacity single. Usually you can't get them below 60 for love nor money, but for whatever reason that Rieju is drinking kind of fuel in relative terms. Still not too bad, but nonetheless. Voge, 69 miles per gallon, perfectly respectable, no issues there. But like I say, the Honda's taller gearing just made all the difference, and that was doing 76 miles per gallon. And at the time of writing, there's interesting things going on around the Strait of Hormuz, and fuel is through the roof. So that one was kind of hitting our wallets the least. And instantly, actually, the Voge, we were within about half a litre of running the tank dry. So that's going to be the biggest restriction. But 160 miles, you're probably going to be stopping at least twice in that time anyway. So unless you really are going out to the back of beyond, or are reversed to going to fuel stations over a weekend riding, there's no real sort of issue with range on any of these bikes. So yeah, okay, just have that big 21 litre tank. But in a lot of ways it's redundant, because these, with their 11 and 12 litre tanks, they're not kind of running out in short order anyway. So Honda is the best one if you've got to get somewhere to kind of kick your adventure off, or find some trails a little bit further from home. But all of them are a little bit of a ordeal, I should say. And for a few miles earlier today, we spent a bit of time on B roads, sort of linking up some of those main arterial routes that we're riding. And these can be quite good fun in that scenario. If you get into the really sort of small back roads where traffic isn't naturally doing more than sort of 40, 50 miles an hour anyway, these kind of come into their own, and kind of bumps and things, and even grit and sand in the road that would bother you on a big bike, they're no issue for these, because they're so nimble, you can steer around it, and you're not carrying big lean. It's not a problem. Obviously the Rieju was at a little bit of disadvantage in this particular trim on those knobblies. Initially the steering feels like it's treacle. It's just so heavy to initially turn, because you're trying to flex those blocks and make it go with you. But I know in standard trim on the Helios base model tyres, it's actually pretty good. It's quite good fun, to be fair. And that was also the case with the Voge. It swings on quite nicely. Suspension's reasonably composed, so that's another sort of plus point for the Voge. And then the Honda as well. It's a little bit kind of springy on its suspension. It goes back and forth a bit, but it's not too bad. And again, you can just fling it around and have a bit of fun as well. So no one bike in particular stood out as the best, really. I mean, potentially the Rieju, if it had more road bias tyres on, we might have felt that that was probably the sort of better one, because it's got the firmest suspension here, it's lighter than the Voge, and it's, like I say, with the firm suspension over the Honda, it's a little bit more kind of direct. So today, not much to split them. If you go for the base model Rieju, that's probably the better one for back road riding, but there's no real losers here. So on that one, it's kind of something of a draw, I would say. So we've wound up our 2-day on and off-road test, over 300 miles on these bikes now, with a really great session doing sort of 20-30 miles around Thetford Forest, back and forth. Smoother trails, bumpier trails. It's been quite dry, fortunately. Some sandy spots though, so they've got a little bit loose and squirrely, so we've got a reasonable read on what these bikes are like on the green lanes and sort of gentler trails. And the verdict isn't really kind of what we might have expected coming into this. Honda is the surprise, but not in a good way. Now, when we've previously tested this bike, we've tested it against bikes like the Himalayan and the CF Moto 450 MT, and they're obviously a lot heavier and they've got less suspension travel, and they're generally a little bit less suited to trail riding, because after all three of these bikes are realistically trail bikes with a bit of a screen and a little bit more weather protection, so you can, in theory, go a little bit further with them. But when you bring it back into the company of its contemporaries, and actually that's where the Honda falls down for £6.5 grand. It's really not good enough. And the biggest thing is, as we always say with it, is the suspension. It's just too softly sprung, too loosely damped. And there's no adjustment other than preload to do anything about it. So when you've got a series of bumps, quite often you get to the second one and it's still dealing with the consequence of the first one. And following it, you can really see it's just going all the way to the bottom of the travel, then coming all the way back and lifting the back end off the floor. And it doesn't matter how far back you kind of lean yourself to try and change the weight distribution. I mean, I've long legs, long arms, I can get a fair way back, but it just doesn't help. And yeah, okay, there's lots of aftermarket options for these. You could try and figure it out, do something else with it. But at this stage in the game, I don't think it's really acceptable to have a Honda like this with, I mean, the basic development cost must be long since paid off by Honda, and everything now is kind of more or less profit. I think it's at the stage where they could add kind of higher spec suspension, not even really flash stuff, just your kind of entry level adjustable stuff, and that would make a big difference to how this bike rides and its kind of longevity as well, because if you own one of these, you're going to start developing your skills if you're a novice, and very quickly you're going to go, well, this isn't enough for me. And yeah, okay, a shock absorber is available, you can do things with the forks, and then you'll want some tyres, but by the time you've done that, you spent kind of well over £1 grand. And that's when you're into the territory of something like a dedicated trail bike, Suzuki's DRZ 4S, or even a lightly used second-hand late model enduro bike. And okay, this has in theory got that travel capability, but as we found out on the road yesterday, it's okay, but you don't really want to do much more than an hour anyway. And I could hack that on a trail bike in any case. So I don't feel like this really makes a case for itself anymore, because there are other options out there. You can go more road biased, or as we found today, you can go more trail biased. And moving on to our second place bike, this was a bit of a surprise because we included it just because there are so many out there quietly getting on with being a first trail bike, or almost a disposable. It's so cheap you can not worry about it. If you drop it on a rock and scratch it, you're not going to be too bothered. The Voge Rally has been a real pleasant surprise, and okay, on the road it's a little bit crude and a little bit kind of lackluster, but none of these bikes sparkle particularly on the road. And when we were doing a section earlier, going between trails on the road, just loping along at 50 miles an hour, the Voge was kind of as good as anything else. We weren't into that point where the engine is too harsh and it's getting a bit buzzy and a bit unpleasant in general. On the trail, it's the superior to the Honda, which is, like I say, a big surprise, but it's the suspension. It's got worse tyres than the Honda as standard. That's obviously a very easy fix, especially for just under £4 grand. But the suspension is so much more controlled. The kind of whoops and rough bits, holes, things like that, the Voge just deals with it, gets on and goes over them, and it lets you deal with that lack of grip because you've got that bit more feel for it, which is so invaluable, whether you know what you're doing off-road, whether you're an intermediate like kind of the riders that have been on this test today, or an expert, because you can just play with it and you're worrying less about what's going on. Whereas when the Honda lets go, because the suspension is kind of extending quickly, it's pushing that tyre and working it, and it's not helping you keep things in control, it's doing things that you're not expecting. And the engine as well, you get it short shifted into third and you just keep going. It's nice and flexible, throttle manners are good, turn the ABS off easily. There's a big sort of nipple shaped thing on the left hand handlebar which makes it nice and easy to do. Standing position, mostly good. I would want some slightly deeper foot pegs. They're a bit too thin in that direction, so you want a bigger platform really. And for my height as well, I would want some handlebar risers, but they're very cheaply available, again from from China, funnily enough, but it's all doable. And just little things like the crash bars. We parked on some sand earlier and it decided to sink into it and fall over. There's not a mark on it, barring a little scratch on the end of the handguard. So just little things like that make a difference, where drop the Honda, potentially you're going to be smashing all this plastic, and I don't think it's drastically expensive considering, but it's a Honda and you're still going to have to pay that a little bit more than you would for its Chinese rival. So Voge, real surprise, really pleased with that, and I'd be happy to take one of those off-road anytime, as lots of owners are, and every time they get aerated on our online reviews because we've said something slightly nasty about it, hands up, we made a bit of a mistake. We kind of missed a few things with it, but here we are now, and today that was our second favourite. Which brings us to the Rieju. And this, it kind of, in some ways, it should have been the best here. It's got the high spec suspension, the R model's obviously got the best tyres, which help a lot, but like I was saying before with the Voge, that extra bit of suspension over the Voge and then over the Honda makes this just so much more stable and easy going. I mean, it actually has adventure bike levels of suspension travel. So we've only got 220mm of travel to play with, but because it uses it way more effectively than the Honda in particular, it's not that big of an issue. There's been the odd occasion where there's a series of whoops and we've landed it just wrong and the bash guard has taken a little kiss, but it's not been that bad. It's not been a big bottoming out and throwing you off course. And yeah, okay, if you live somewhere where the trails are a bit more rocky and you have to climb over stuff, you're probably going to run into a little bit more issue. But this is kind of more of an adventure bike than a sort of strict trail or enduro bike. So sometimes that's going to be the compromise you have. And to be honest, it's so light and so narrow, you can probably either pick a path through stuff or lift it over, particularly if you've got mates riding with you and you can just hop it over stuff. It's the advantage of this because it's much lighter than the Voge, which came in at around 170 kilos, whereas this was just short of 160, but that was with a full tank of fuel. So you don't necessarily need that full 21 litre capacity. You can leave a little bit out and it'll be even easier to handle. Throttle manners, really good off-road, no issues there. Gearbox, actually that's something I didn't mention with the Voge, obviously they share a bottom end. They're a little bit soft and woolly, it's almost like there's not enough spring tension. And there's also quite a lot of travel as well, so you have to be really positive with it, but you never really get much feedback for what's going on. So the gear position indicator on that big TFT dash is often quite essential to know that you're in the gear you're expecting to be in. But there are lots of little quibbles with it, but overall we've enjoyed this more than any of the other two bikes here today. It's been the easiest to ride, it's been the most fun, it's been the quickest if you're somewhere where you can really sort of push on. Obviously these are sort of open byways to everybody, so we've not gone too crazy with it, but when there are sections where you can sort of push on a little bit more without causing harm, offence to anybody, you can do with this. The other thing I would say is what I mentioned earlier, where we have this £900 performance kit of the exhaust, airbox and the ECU. I don't think I'd recommend it. If you buy one of these bikes and think, yeah, this needs lots more power, you've bought the wrong kind of bike. These are meant to be easygoing, beginner friendly, and just, they're not meant to be aggressive enduro bikes. For all the will in the world, you can fit all the performance kits, big bores, camshafts, whatever you want to these. It's going to pep it up a little bit, but you're going to spend a lot of money, make it less reliable, and ultimately you're still not going to be as good as an enduro bike, so don't waste your time. And to be honest, it's a little bit obnoxious as well. It drones a little bit if you've got to sort of carry any speed for a little while. And it's also caused a bit of a starting issue, we think, with this as well, because it does have the removable baffling, which helps with the noise. But every now and again we'd come to start it and turn it over and there'd just be this horrendous smell of fuel as if it had flooded itself, which in theory it shouldn't do because it's fuel injected. It's not like the old carburetor days where you could just gas it and put too much down its throat. But for whatever reason this is doing it, and I didn't have that issue with the bike I tested earlier in the year, just with the standard exhaust and intake setup. So leave that alone. It looks great, but I don't think it's really worth that kind of extra effort. I think you'd be better putting your time and money into playing with the suspension a little bit down the line, because although it is pretty good, I suspect the shock is probably going to be sort of fairly worn out after a year or so of riding. We've been playing with the adjusters today and we've ramped the compression and rebound damping up, and they're pretty much on the maximum now. So okay, we're heavier riders, all three of us, but equally I don't think that kind of damping quality is going to last too long, and that's kind of okay, because I mean, even with the Voge, it's quite basic, and if you're going to start pushing more and you're going to wear it out, reach its limits, and you're going to want something else. Honda, we've already discussed that. That at least you you kind of own it for a year or so, get a feel for it, decide if this is for you or not, because lots of people do get into off-road riding and then decide, you know what, this isn't my bag, don't have the time, whatever the case is. But this is something you could own for a year and then start chipping away and make it a little bit better, make it a bit more you. And so for me, it's a mild irritant that's kind of a little bit flaky, but it's not a deal breaker for me. So with all three facets of our on and off-road test completed, we should probably pick a winner out of it. And I kid you not, we've stood here thrashing out, arguing over things for a goodly while before we've been able to come to a unanimous decision on this. And it comes with a few kind of caveats, and also the obvious thing that some of these factors are subjective, and in certain instances you'll probably go, well, I'm only going to have that one no matter what you say, but we'll get into that. So last, but a kind of admirable and sort of plucky last, is the Voge. And we're saying that because on the road it is kind of the most crude, it's the least comfortable. Much more than 50, 55, you're kind of struggling, and sometimes you do just need to get somewhere at 60 or more. And equally, it is quite cheap and quite simply made, and you would sort of worry about certain things lasting in the long run. But for some people, that incredible value for money, it's just going to sell it on its own, as it has done for kind of a good few years now. I mean, probably the main thing for me is it looks kind of the gawkiest here. So if Voge gave that a bit of a kind of a refresh, some new bodywork and maybe things like bigger foot pegs and just niced it up a little bit, they could probably still keep the same value by keeping the same engine, frame, things like that. I mean, potentially, they obviously build the engine for the Rieju, so they could look at installing a spec, either that one or something similar, just give it a little bit more pep, and also a little bit more sort of high RPM legs and civility, which the Rieju does have. But it's an admirable bike, and I would quite happily sort of take that for a on and off-road day trip anytime. So really solid performance, but there has to be an order of things, so we're going to move on up. And conveniently, it moves along the line to the Honda, which on the road, it was the easiest to ride at speed. It's got the sort of nicest character on B roads and things like that, just sort of loping along. It sort of handles quite nicely on tarmac, and the engine is quite a charismatic little thing actually for what it is. But we feel for this kind of bike that these really, they are skewed towards off-road riding. You'd kind of be a bit daft really to buy one of these over some of the parallel twins or more road-oriented singles, just because they are limited. They've got sort of a cap on what sort of speed you can hold, there's a cap on how much distance your backside will be able to stand, and really it's just a means to get to a trail. And when it gets to a trail, the Honda really comes undone. And if it was kind of the bargain that it was when these CRF300s and 250s first came out, you could probably forgive that. But Honda have kind of crept the price up a little bit over the years, and £6,500 just feels like way too much. And again, going back to the sort of caveats and subjective factors, for some people, including sort of Chris Moss, who's on our test today, he felt that he would buy the Honda just because it says Honda on it, and you know there's a dealer network there that's kind of always going to have parts in stock quickly. And there's a certain kind of reassurance with that sort of known, long-established brand. But I mean, equally, the Voge has been out for a long time. The owner reviews are pretty good. There's sort of minimal talk of really catastrophic, debilitating failure. So I would probably have more faith in that than I might have done 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. I wouldn't have any real qualms with that, but each their own. So it depends. But basing them on a dynamic and enjoyment sort of factors, as we have been doing on this test, the Honda kind of falls a little bit short. So that brings us to the new contender, the Rieju. Not perfect by any means. Like I say, we had that issue with the starting. I think that is down to the performance kit as well. It's kind of a little bit cheap in places, but when you've taken a bike off-road and you're probably going to drop it, get it dirty, scratch it, it's going to go rusty because you're washing it a lot potentially. In some ways that's kind of immaterial. It's not a disposable item necessarily, but you're kind of getting on for that. There's going to be a certain amount of attrition and wear, and you're going to have to deal with that. So that doesn't bother me too much. And the fact that it's got these nice thick off-road style decals, you can kind of deal with that to a certain degree as well. But the performance off-road, it kind of makes up for the fact that it's really not great to try and ride any kind of distance, but it's only marginally worse than the other two. On B roads, it's nice to lope along again, 50, 60 miles an hour, just enjoying the scenery. It's kind of nice on those bits between your lanes. And then when you get to the lanes, these two, they're not going to see you for dust. This thing In fact, they will see your dust. That's all they're going to see. This thing just gets on with it really confidently. It's stable, it's easy to manage. Obviously in this specification with the better tyres, there's much more grip, but even on the standard Helios tyres, which are the same as the Voge, when I sort of rode that in the wet earlier this year, it gets on and lets you use that grip because you've got proper feel for it, and it's just intrinsically better as a chassis package. ABS is easy to turn off, it's got a great dash. With the Honda, you can only turn the ABS on the rear, and the Voge, it's a bit fiddly to do, and the dash is kind of pretty ugly and old-fashioned in all fairness. So just there's lots of little things that just make this a better package overall for this end of the adventure bike market, because we feel if you're buying something like this, you do want more off-road adventure capability out of it than necessarily tarmac adventure. So that's our verdict, and that's going to be the bike that we're going to take forward into our grand finale of adventure bikes later this year. So we've still got 2 more classes to do. We've got the parallel twins, bikes like the F450 GS, to see how they stack up. Then we've also got the singles class, and we've got the new BSA Thunderbolt coming into that, which a little bit of an outside choice, but we've got to give it its due and see how that fares as well. So for now, I'm going to thank you for watching. Please drop a like and sort of give us your feedback on where you see these bikes in the market and which one you would pick or not pick potentially. And make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can see the rest of the 2 qualifiers in this series, and then the grand finale towards the end of the year. Thank you for watching.